Welcome back, everybody, to the Denver Dzogchen podcast. I'm here once again with Joseph Wagner, and today we're going to have a discussion about a section of the practices that don't often get discussed, and I think people often wonder what it really is and what it's about. And that is the guru, the deva or the yidam, and the dakini. Right. So these follow the Ngondro practices. So a lot of people never finish their Ngondro practices, which you should. But once you finish your Ngondro practices, then you're given this next section of practices. And I wonder, Joe, if you just share a little bit about your experience with them, what they are, and why they're important.
Okay. Again, not a total expert here, but talking just based on my own experience. Well, everybody knows the three jewels, right? The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. This is the foundation of a Buddhist thought. We got the Buddha, who represents the teacher, represents the source of all of the transformation, the potential transformation of humans into, the superior form of being called Buddha. The Dharma, which is the means by which the practice takes place, like you have to practice the teachings on meditation, on mind control, and so forth, whether that's, from the early teachings of Buddhism or all the way through the Vajrayana, whatever. And then the Sangha is the community of practitioners. And sometimes they break it down into various different groups. The close group of those who are students of the same teacher, or all sentient beings who want freedom, or whatever. So we've got the three jewels. The inner aspect of the three jewels is the three roots, right? And then there's outer, inner, and secret in so much of Vajrayana, right? So just to cover that, outer is the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Inner is the three roots, the guru, the Yidam, and the Dakini. And the secret is the three kayas, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. And these are all correspond to each other, right? So we have in the general teachings, we have the three jewels. We have the Buddha, who represents, is Shakyamuni Buddha in this particular case. And the Vajrayana, we have the interview of the Buddha, and the Buddha in this case is the guru, our own personal guru. It's often said that our guru is actually more precious than the Buddha himself. And this might seem outrageous to some, but the reason is because we can receive the teachings directly from our guru. And we can't receive the teachings directly from the Buddha unless you're real special. And so this is sort of the inner aspect, our personal way of receiving the teachings. And these teachings, the root, when we say the three roots, the root of the blessings is the guru. He or she is the one who bestows upon us empowerment, the authority to practice, the energy, the power to be able to make these practices work. Those blessings come from the guru. That's the first of the three roots. The second aspect, the Dharma aspect of the three roots is the Yidam. Yidam is your personal chosen deity. Sometimes one chooses for oneself, sometimes the Lama chooses for you. Maybe it's just circumstances that you just happen to receive such and such an empowerment, and that becomes your Yidam. But Yidam means like your personal deity. And this is the Dharma aspect, in that by visualizing your body as the body of the deity of, let's say, Tara, visualizing your physical body as Tara, reciting the speech of Tara, which is the mantra of Tara, Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re So, or Om Tare Tam Soha, pending, or one of the many Taras forms. Then that's the speech of the deity. And then the mind of the deity is the unification of clarity and emptiness, or bliss and emptiness, depending on your viewpoint. And that's the mind aspect. This is the Dharma, in the sense that that's how we gain the accomplishment, is we receive the blessings, but if there's nothing we can do to practice that, to come again into that psychic presence of the master, then we would have to follow the master around everywhere. That would be very annoying for the master and very difficult for us, just so that he or she would be giving us some blessings all the time. Instead, we learn how to embody those blessings in our practice of the Yidam, the Maha-yoga practice of the visualization of the deity, the recitation of the deity's mantra, and the mind of the deity in our own mind as samadhi. And that is the Dharma aspect of the three roots, or the Yidam. And then there's the Dakini, which they say is the root of the enlightened activity. And so in this case, that's the Sangha aspect, in that for the most part, that has to do with interacting with others, with our environment, right? So bringing those teachings, those insights that we've gained through the blessing of the master, then ripening those blessings to become the deity, in the sense that by practicing the Yidam, then we embody those qualities that the Yidam manifest, whether it's wrathful compassion in the form of Vajrayana, or love like Tara, or some other form. That the way that manifests in our world is the Dakini, the feminine aspect, the root of, in this case, the enlightened activities that come as a result of all the practice that we do. And then, of course, there's the innermost, the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya, which, are exactly the same thing. Just to cover that, the mind of the Buddha is the Dharmakaya. It's space, it's awareness alone, no other forms, totally ultimate insight, and so forth. That's the mind of the Buddha, which is the mind of the Guru, which is the Dharmakaya. And then the, Buddha Dharma in the, the three jewels level, the Yidam. And then that's the Sambhogakaya, where we're interfacing with the ultimate nature in a more accessible way than the absolute emptiness and clarity of the Dharmakaya. We're bringing it into our own experience through the practice of the Yidam. And these different Yidams represent different forces and different aspects of humans, and also of the ultimate nature, and so forth. That's the Sambhogakaya, kind of the link between the physical world of the Nirmanakaya and the ultimately purified world of the Dharmakaya, so to speak. And then the Sangha aspect, which is like all practitioners in the three jewels. It's the Dakini aspect in the three roots, and it's the Nirmanakaya, the manifest aspect, how we act in the world, how we bring these teachings to others, and how we live in a way that's of maximum benefit and compassionate, that's a new word, compassionate way for the benefit of others. Our bodhicitta activity, so to speak, is the Nirmanakaya. So then that's just a general overview of the three levels of this, but they're all the same thing. They're all pointing at the same truths.
It's so amazing to me. In a lot of ways, what we're doing is reenacting what the Buddha went through, right? So like we're setting up in our own lives his experience of renunciation, and his experience of having a teacher, and then his experience of visions, and and so on and so on. The Vajrayana gives us a way to live it, right? We're living an experience similar to Shakyamuni had in his own life. And then in the Vajrayana way, we're going through the experience of Guru Rinpoche, often in the Nyingma school, right? So we're kind of going through the different phases of his training and life. And that's why it's so important to follow the path, right? Like as it's laid out, because as Westerners, and in the modern world of the information age, where you have access to absolutely every teaching and everything is just out there, there's a real easy temptation to want to just pick and choose and do something you feel like, and then do another thing you feel like, or maybe not even do it at all, or or mix things, this sort of thing. For people to recognize that there is a purpose to the trajectory of the path as it's laid out, and some real it's really a shame that more people aren't willing to do the whole systematized thing as it's laid out. Yes, you've already received Dzogchen teachings, and yes, you already have access to some of these different things, but that doesn't devalue the going through step by step, all the way from the four thoughts through Nundro, through the three roots, and into Tsalung and on to Dzogchen. If you really do that, it sets you up in this foundational way where you really have built the solid Dharma life that isn't possible otherwise. And it's not just haphazard, that, as you were saying, these are all corresponding to different elements of your life and practice, and they all bring forward results that build on one another. And it really is amazing to me as you start to go along the path, you start to notice these resonances between them, right? Like in the three roots practices and Tsalung practices, you'll be doing furthering of what you did in your Nundro, right? So like in your Nundro, you're doing this accumulation and purification, and then it gets subtler and subtler and subtler as you move along the path, and you're purifying from the coarsest elements of your body to the most subtle energies of your mind. This process is like a smelting process that's really amazing and intentional. And I just think I wish people understood how cool it is and that it's worth doing.
Well said. I thought that was beautifully rendered right there. These days, as you said, the teachings are kind of all available, and everybody thinks, I'm the smartest, I'm the best, so therefore I got to start at the top. I don't know how well that works. I suppose it's with some people, it may be enough, to just receive the pointing out instructions and just live in that reality. Hey, I wish everyone luck with whatever they choose to do, because we are on our own paths and everybody has to make their own decisions. That said, Vajrayana is really cool because it's laid out so well. I thought your analogy of the smelting process, that's worth revisiting. That was very good. If we are, it's nice if you could just pan for gold and get big lumps of gold, party. They're already pure, no problem, you straight to the bank. In most cases, those are so rare, right? That's like extremely rare to find a piece of gold in a stream or on the ground. Most of the time, you have to find a gold-bearing ore, like a sand or something, where the gold is probably too small to even see. And then you have to use various processes to separate the slag from the precious metals, whatever those precious metals are. And in our body, speech, and mind, it's exactly the same. Everything is mixed together. Does everybody have the Buddha nature? Yes. Does that mean that everybody's living from it? Unfortunately not. You get all kinds of people, and that's, you get every level of perversion and every level of purity in this world. And as it's said in every type of teaching, the sun of the Buddha nature is always shining, but it's covered by the clouds of our disturbing emotions, our past tendencies, our sankalpas, and all this business that we have to have a means to remove. And the thing about the Vajrayana is it's a step-by-step process for doing exactly that. If you're gonna, I don't know much about the refining of gold, so it's just, I just use it as a general idea. But if you have, a bunch of gold-bearing sand or whatever, the first thing would be to take out all the stuff that's not sand, right? So you need a means for doing that. Maybe you run it through a sieve or something and all the dirt comes out. Maybe you wash it and some of the dissolvables are swept away by the water. That's like the thinking about the four mind changings, really contemplating and going through the four mind changings. We have to get down to what we actually have to work with, right? This very body and its circumstances, its impermanence, right? First we got the body, then we got the impermanence, then we got the karma that we have, we have to purify, and then we have to go from there to the continual recontemplation of the situation that we find ourselves in, which is that it's tinged with suffering and difficulty. That's the fact of the matter. So that's like getting the most gross impurities out of the way. Once you have that, then you can use more fine methods, just like you said. I thought that whole thing was very good, by the way, to get at the actual gold out of the sand. And maybe those are going to be chemical methods. And we need something more powerful. We can't just use mechanical methods like sifting or dissolving in water. We have to use more powerful methods. And those would be the practices of the three roots, which are the actual practices of the Vajrayana. Usually they're combined with the Dzogchen practices too, at some level, depending on the Lama and so forth.
Yeah. So we're like, we got to get the stuff out of the earth. We have to chisel away and hammer at it. And this is kind of like the basic renunciation. We get our life together. We get so that we're not causing tons of harm, that we're trying to be as helpful as we can. And then we still have all these subtle things. So it's like you can get kind of cleaned up, but you'll notice that your mind is still like distracted, and you're still like can't sit still, and you still want to, watch TV, or you're even distracted by intellectual ideas all the time, or the more subtle, not so harmful, but also kind of pernicious tendencies for distraction, which I don't know about you, but for me, it's like all the time, right? Like all the time, my
all the
mind is
time.
not staying where I want it to stay. So, but when we begin to work with the mantra recitation and the visualization, then it starts to, like, we replace our ordinary thoughts with the mantra. So it starts to like quiet things down and quiet things down. And then you can get to a place where you're like sufficiently, your mind is much calmer and you have much more confidence. And these are kind of like fruits of the three roots. And then eventually you'll notice, though, that like, but then the body is still aching, and you have different kinds of cloudiness and lack of clarity, etc. And then you have like the energy practices, which really clean that up, so that we can finally be able to approach something like the Dzogchen practices, because all of this energy and patterning has been blocking our experience of it. And we all know, like, we go to an empowerment and we step into the field of the Lama or whatever, and you can kind of like jump forward and get a little taste of what it might be like. And you're like, wow, okay, it's right there, and so you can feel like, well, there must not be much to do. But really, these patterns are so pernicious and have been around for so many eons that it really going through these things is in my experience, completely unavoidable. You have to go through and really work with the mind so that you can get to a place where something like resting and letting go completely is even really, truly possible.
That's very well said. And I'll tell a little story I think I shared in the previous podcast. I asked, or someone in our little group asked a question very similar to this of a great master called Choying Dorje, Lama Norsok Rinpoche, who spent more than 50 years, 50, doing retreat, mostly in a cave that I visited in Kham. He's unfortunately since passed away, but an incredible master. Like, I've never met anyone like that. Really an old timer in the best possible way. We had the opportunity to ask questions one time, and someone asked the question, well, why don't we just practice the view, the Trekcho view? Because that's the direct way. And he said, that's a really good question. He said, people come here all the time and ask me that question. And he said, simply practicing Dzogchen, that does not work in my experience. He said, it's because, and this was a unique thing that he said, which I pass on because I thought it was so interesting. He said, if you only practice Dzogchen, there's no place for the blessings of the Lama to land, because you're an ordinary person. They can't land on you. That's how it was translated. I'm not 100% sure what he said, but I think this is a very interesting view. And I'm not trying to convince anyone, but it is very easy to intellectualize Dzogchen and to turn it into just a sort of subtle thought process and a kind of maybe not even very deep shamatha practice if you don't have a place for these blessings to land. And that is created through following the path, right?
Yeah.
Is it necessary to do the Nundro? I mean, it's a case by case basis, but when you say like those who do not need to do the Nundro, what percentage are they? I think it's pretty small,
Yeah.
right? Is it necessary to reflect on the four mind changings? Almost everybody has to do this. But you theoretically could just, yeah, I heard Tolkien say, if you had a person who lived on a desert island and the Lama went there and gave the pointing out instructions and they only practiced that, they could still attain enlightenment. Maybe so. But we don't live on a desert island. We live in samsara, and samsara is freaking busy and is full of confusion and many different obligations, all of which are quite important if you want to keep your heat on and your kids fed. It's necessary, right? So it seems much more effective and more likely to cause the right outcome if you go through the path the way it's designed, just like we said before at the analogy of purifying gold. We start grossest and more subtle. And there's another aspect to that. It isn't only purifying, it's also gathering the accumulations of having enough merit to really understand what what these higher teachings are pointing at and what they're really about and how they're inseparable from love and compassion. They're not just some sort of way of not caring.
Yeah.
Being in some sort of not caring state where your mind doesn't work. I mean, that's like this pen, its mind doesn't work either. What good is that? And try to get it to do the laundry. It doesn't help at all. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important for everyone to contemplate what they're doing and what their goal is. If your goal is just having fun and receiving teachings that are very profound, then you can do that. That's cool. If your goal is the real Buddhist goal of ending suffering for all beings, then it might be good to, practice all of the pieces. And you never know what affinity you might have. I find that the 3 youth practices, I love them. The practices of the guru, where you're visualizing whatever guru it is. For Nyingmas, it's usually Padmasambhava, but could be any of these great masters, and in different traditions, it's slightly different. But the energy is the same. It's the blessing of the purity of the Lama's realization, right? These are incredibly inspiring. You feel so close to the lineage and so forth. The Yidam practices are the very foundation of all of Vajrayana. To visualize yourself as the deity, recite the deity's mantra, have the mind be in samadhi. Is it absolutely necessary for everyone? Who can say? But I certainly love it, and it brings about many different benefits that are not only, incorporated within recognizing the view or something. It has a lot more to do with the circumstances of your life being transformed into a Dharma life. I look at your tankas and pictures behind you, and that stuff's in your life. You see in my world, it's the same, right? Vajrayana is a kind of lifestyle, and we want it to be everything in our lives, the whole of our lives, to be touched by Dharma. We don't want to be like, oh yeah, I practice meditation in the morning, but then I'm a pickpocket. It's not a good job. That's why the Buddha taught the Eightfold Path with right livelihood and so forth. And it is much easier to engage your whole life when you have all these pieces in place, right? Then the Lama, the Yidam, and the Dakini, they're all necessary, it seems.
I think it's so profound what Lama Norsok said, because you can really take this. I was having a conversation with an old Vajra sibling this last weekend. We've been practicing in the same Sangha for 15 years together. And she said to me, I've known you for a long time now, and we've both really changed. And that's the amazing, like, how many things can you say that about? I know people who've been in therapy for decades and barely changed at all. But most of the people I know who practice the Dharma seriously continue to change and grow, like less bad habits, more kind, more flexible. There's actually a really amazing study that was done that I think is worth sharing. So I can't remember the exact details of it, but it was a moral question they gave to people about moral development. And so like they observed that in general, people stopped growing in moral development in their early 20s. And that they usually don't go beyond wherever they get to around that age. There's another little gap at 50 where people go through another moment of growth. But other than that, people don't tend to grow morally. And the test they did for this was they actually used the question of abortion. And they said, is abortion wrong? And the way that the 3 stages of moral development that they put out was the first people say, no, it's not wrong because I can do whatever I want. The second level was, yes, it's wrong because my religion, moral codes, etc., say it is wrong. And the highest level of moral development was, it's never a good thing, but sometimes it's necessary due to the complexity of situations, right? So they used this kind of measure, and they had some way of knowing that this tended to, people would go from the first to the second to the third. They would never go in any other order. People tend to grow along this line of moral development based on a whole bunch of other things. They used this test, and they studied people who were meditators, and they were the only people who continued to grow through moral development, not people who were in therapy, not people who were doing nothing. The only people who significantly continued to grow after their 20s in their moral development were meditators, which to me makes sense because you're detaching from your ego, right? Like the whole point is you're detaching from your ego mind so that you can get some space from it so that you could grow. because as long as we're immersed in it, as long as we are it, then we don't change. But when we have these practices, which are all designed one way or another to disconnect us from these patterns, it frees us to grow. It frees us to be able to move forward. And so really like the powerful thing, like the word Buddha means to like completely purified and full of qualities, right? We have to, if we're going to fulfill our bodhisattva vow, what does that really mean? Well, a huge part of it, like Lama Norsok is saying, you could step into the blessing of the Lama. You could have the moment of the pointing out instruction. You can have an experience of the nature of your mind, but there's nowhere for it to land because you're still a mess. So we clean this up so that it can shine through, so that it can benefit others, so that we can be better people also. Like on a relative ordinary level, we can also continue to grow and change, which is amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad you told about that story. I had not heard that and that study. And I think it's true, we want to, if Dharma does anything, it forces you to be in the present, right? And whether that's just today or this very instant, you realize that your only real autonomy and power is right now. You can't do anything yesterday and tomorrow unformed, right? Today, we can act in a way that is going to have real meaning. And I think as you practice these things more, and there's compassion is so much wrapped in all this, the connection between us and all beings, the sameness of all life. How can it be any other way than that you would continue to embrace the gray, let's say, right? Like those positions you said before, those are very black and white. It's 100% wrong. That's where our crazy government is right now, right? It's 100% right. It's not right. To be able to embrace these opposites or these circumstances based on the individual occurring of each individual time is what it's about. And getting yourself out of your own way, letting go of all this stuff you heard before, and being able to objectively see a situation as it's arising is what the Dharma is really about. And so it doesn't surprise me that whether it's Dharma meditation or all types of meditation, it must keep something in your brain flexible. So that's good. We want to be as flexible as possible. And it says in the Tao Te Ching, the famous Taoist text, that young babies are soft and flexible, and old people are hard and brittle. And that's the difference. And so that's why we do yoga, right? That's why we do stretching. My parents in their 80s still do Pilates for this exact reason, to stay as youthful and flexible as we can. And the more flexible we are, the more we see, the whole world is gray. Nothing is black and white. You can't, even the Buddha killed that merchant on that ship, right? Because to save all the other people. So, we never know. And it makes me happy that they studied this and that meditators are more likely to continue to grow. I sure hope I can.
When we're taking, and so back to the three roots, of course, I can never summarize the complexity and potency of these practices. But if you look at like the deities as sort of like an energy, like a microchip, right? Like they have all these different symbols and qualities and sounds. It's like if you studied all of the different things, like the implements the deity holds, the mantra the deity has, the color it is, the Buddha family it's part of, it's like a whole Dharma teaching condensed into this image. And so we're not only practicing meditation by, relaxing our mind and not attaching to concepts, etc., but we're also infusing ourselves now with this Dharma so that our ego is getting put out of the way and replaced with this Yidam, who really is the embodiment of the Dharma, right? So like these three roots practices are these amazing like technologies for infusing our mind with the Dharma instead, which it doesn't just mean like Buddhism, like Dharma as in truth, as in instead of ignorance, we're putting these truths into our system and infusing ourselves with it. Like it really is magic. It's so amazing.
Magic. It's the way that the magic of the insight of the Buddha, which has been continually passed down from, master to disciple up until our times. It's the way that we can live that, can learn how to embody that, is through the practice of the Dharma, which in Vajrayana is, the Yidam, the way of embodying these ultimate realities that are closer, that are less covered up by our personal ideas and our, the time and place where we find ourselves. They're timelessness, right? The idea of removing obstacles like Vajrakilaya has as his goal. And all of the implements show this. And as the more you imagine yourself in possession of this form as opposed to your ordinary form, the more you live from that place and obstacles do get removed. The more that you embody yourself as Tara and love and compassion for all beings, then the more you find yourself actually loving beings more. Is in my case, I'm full of hatred and I have less hatred than I used to. And I attribute that in part to practicing Yidams like Tara. It does work. And it's
Yeah.
fun to do. And I've heard it said many times, at least when you're meditating, you're not doing evil stuff. So it
Yeah.
has the value too. It,
Yeah.
it, it does seem to work, and it gives us a place, a way to inculcate these more enlightened tendencies into this body, which has its own self-preservation and tendencies, which is kind of almost the opposite of the Dharma in many cases.
Yeah, and the like something like the purba, the dagger that Vajrakalaya holds, it has these four qualities. It can be summarized as great compassion, basically, right? So you have this implement of compassion. So by meditating on yourself holding this implement of compassion, it's the magic of the purba goes into your system. It's really this quality of Dharma teaching. And so it's not just like, these aren't ordinary, these aren't weapons, these aren't flowers, these aren't, they're packets of information about the teachings and what we want to become. And so but when we're sitting there meditating, it's superior to thinking about the concepts, right? So that would be like one way to study.
Yeah,
But
it's deeper.
yeah, deeper, and you can relax more and allow it to get in because you're not like up here tossing it
I'm not
around.
thinking about it. It's something in the form of the kila or in the form of the Dambara flower, whatever, and like these kinds of things, they hit us at a more subconscious level and they allow a deeper form of transformation to take place than just trying to think, I want to be nicer or something like that. You can actually start to live from it because those good qualities are already part of us. They just aren't what we normally fall back on.
Yeah, I have to think like Carl Jung's whole concepts around the archetypes and everything has to be tied in here, that we're tapping into these deep, symbols that are really part of our consciousness, and working at that level. And by getting ourselves into a samadhi, then we're able to access these subtler parts of our minds back to the smelting thing. We have to melt the gold, right? You have to melt it to get the impurities out, which means you have to get to you can't be at the dualistic conceptual level. You have to get to a much subtler level to get those impurities out. And that's really what this process is about.
It really is beautifully said.
Well, once again, I want to thank everybody for watching. Thank you, Joe, for having these conversations with me. I really enjoy our podcast, and I learn a lot from it, and it inspires me even more. Really, my main goal with the podcast is to inspire myself and others to the Dharma. Like, really, I love it so much. It's done nothing but good for me, and I hope that our viewers who also practice the Dharma listen to this and are inspired to go sit on their cushion. I hope that's the first thing they do. Just go back to their practice, and enjoy their practice and be reinvigorated. So I hope it does that for you. Thank you so much for watching. And if you don't mind clicking that like, subscribe, leave a comment, share it on your social media, we really appreciate that. And we'll see you next time.